Good day, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Drinks with MakerDAO Delegates. First, we have from the streets of Berlin, right? Tim Schupner with the brand new logo and the brand new T-shirt that he minted literally overnight. I can't believe it. How in the world did you get that T-shirt minted so fast?
Well, you can just look it up in an online store. I got it from Redbubble. So it's not something I created or anyone created. It was just a cool term that a bunch of people picked up and said, yeah, that's the name of the organization.
And also on the show is a man who needs no introduction. He's no stranger to Drinks with MakerDAO Delegates. Always has the greatest delights that Germany can offer. Here is Flipside Crypto Zone, Rafael.
Hola, hello, guten Tag, buenos dias, bon dia, privyet. What else can I say? Happy to be here, Frank.
Yeah,
Servus.
for sure, man.
Servus, exactly, forgot that one. Servus from the streets of Bavaria.
Multi-language folks here joining us today. I am your co-host as well. My name is Frank Cruz from Flip Flop Flap Delegate LLC, recognized delegate platform here for MakerDAO. We have today, speaking of folks that we are kind of dear to my heart, and I'm pretty sure to you, Shupi and Raf, folks from the GovAlpha Core Unit. First of all, I want to introduce a gentleman who has been here for quite a while now, who has helped me through some thick and thin situations when I couldn't understand perhaps a maker improvement proposal, a MIP. That's our very own GovAlpha facilitator, co-facilitator that is, Payton Rose.
Hey everybody, I'm Proslov and I'm Maker. I cannot say hello in nearly as many languages, nor have a new branding to drop, but I am pretty stoked to be making my debut here on Drinks with Delegates. So about time for this app and happy to get some questions with you guys.
Terrific. Happy to have you, Payton, and your co-partner in crime. I don't know how MakerDAO was able to find this individual, but he is a gem. I think that once Long for Wisdom was gone, I kind of felt, that we were going to miss that United Kingdom leadership that only the UK can produce. So I'm so happy to have him on board. He goes by the name of Patrick J. He is the British sensation, none other than co-facilitator of GovAlpha Core Unit, Patrick. Yay!
Thank you, Frank. That was a tremendous introduction. I think it must be a rule that we always have to have a British facilitator at GovAlpha, and I was glad to step into the position when Long stepped down. But yeah, no, happy to be here. Happy to have a chat with you guys, and just have a good time.
And to kick it off, this is Drinks with MakerDAO Delegates. So on today's show, myself, I decided to go out there and find something British, something that, kind of gave that United Kingdom sort of swagger, if you will. But yeah, this is pretty Chad. It's actually a 70-year Queen's Platinum Jubilee made by none other than Samuel Smith's. I almost forgot. I don't know if it's a British brewery, but I was able to find this.
Wow.
Yeah.
That sure is something.
So in honor of all my brothers and sisters from the UK, for the Queen, long live the Queen. The Queen's Platinum Jubilee. I believe Patrick J, correct me if I'm wrong. It says here 70 years. I don't know if that means the brewery 70 years, but Jubilee is supposed to be, 100, right? Oh no, is it 70?
You have different ones, but it didn't really age very well if it says "Long live the Queen" on it.
What do you have for us today, Patrick? Speaking of the Queen, what are you drinking today on Drinks with MakerDAO Delegates?
Yeah, so I'm coming live from Scotland. So I thought, what else but a nice whiskey. So I am drinking a 10-year-old ARDBEG whiskey. It's an Islay. whiskey. One of the, I think it's 7 distilleries on the island. I still need to go, but it's one of my favorites. It's really peaty, really smoky. I would give it 4.5 out of 5.
Terrific. Man, I wish we had Greg DePrisco here, former Grove Core Unit team member, because this guy, he claims to be an expert on whiskeys. And I think, Patrick J., you might have given him a run for his money, especially since you come from the land of whiskey, Scotland. So enjoy that Scotch, my brother. Let's move on to none other than Payton Rose.
Yeah, definitely. It's a little after 9 a.m. local here, so I did unfortunately make the decision to go with something a bit more stimulating. Filter's gonna be a little annoying there, but I've got some Kerberos coffee from a wonderful roaster in Milwaukee called Colectivo, so just up the lake from where I'm at in Chicago. I made it myself. Nice little ceramic pour over. Yeah, get to work
cool.
with the rest of the workday for me.
Fantastic, and I see it's Ethiopian, right? So it's got to be good coffee.
Yeah, Ethiopian's my favorite region of beans. It's just like very light and fruity region for coffee. So if you see some Ethiopian roast, I highly recommend it.
Apparently, they discovered coffee in Ethiopia, right? Like that's where it's from. It's like origin country.
That sounds about right to me. So I'd buy it. Yeah, coffee's kind of cool because it only grows between the tropics. So and I don't know if we're talking climate change and in-game and all that fun stuff later, but coffee is actually going to be one of those kind of sad victims, early victims of kind of the change in global climate, because it only grows in this very narrow geographic region, and the better coffee we like to drink is actually grown at higher altitude, so there's even less forestable land for it. So maybe a callback for later, we'll see.
There you go. Some lessons on coffee harvesting, only on Drinks with MakerDAO Delegates. Thank you for that small lesson there, Payton. Really helpful. What do you got there, Schupner?
Yeah, I have something really nice for you here, but it's still January, so it's still detox month, so it's not a beer again. So what I have here is another Fritz Limo from Hamburg, Germany. It's a apple cherry elderberry lemonade. I bought a really big basket of it, or what is casket? What's the term you're using there? I don't know.
Casket.
So yeah, casket, like 20 bottles, because the color was really it was really convincing. I already had it. It's really good, but it's right from the fridge, the first lemonade today. So I'm curious how this is after a full working day already. That's my drink. And Raphael's probably not having lemonade, right?
I don't. I brought beer. So me and Patrick are like, keeping the flame alive, and I have something that I reserved for this special session. And it's the only unicorn-themed beer that I have ever seen. Isa unicorn beer. The slogan is "Crazy outside, totally natural inside." So cheerio.
It's a Uniswap beer. Yeah. Cheers, guys. Cheers to all of you. Happy New Year to GovAlpha. Excited to see what 2023 brings for all of us. Cheers.
Launcher.
All right, we have a lot to talk about, a lot to unpack here at MakerDAO and the community, and how we're handling 2023 when it comes to governance, DAO governance, which is such a conundrum, right? We're looking to write history and lead the way when it comes to DAO governance. So with that in mind, let's kick things off with a couple of questions for our guests, Payton Rose and Patrick J. First question I have, and I'll kick things off here. How did you end up at MakerDAO, and what inspired you to join GovAlpha Core Unit?
We can go in chronological order, I guess, Patrick. So I joined Maker, I guess, November of 2020 it was. Feels like both forever and not that long ago. Found it completely by chance, like literally via one of those Coinbase Earn videos. Was watching, getting some free crypto, and most of the times was just click, give me my money or what have you. But when we came to Maker and talked about collateralized lending and the DAI stablecoin, I was like, oh, now this is actually like kind of interesting. So that was my gateway into DeFi. I basically, through that little video, started playing around, opening vaults, doing some yield schemes between Maker and Compound, and all sorts of other silly stuff for someone who didn't fully understand how expensive transactions could get at the time. But anyway, literally just fell into Maker because they made a governance change. It they raised the dust. Essentially, I couldn't open my vault any further unless I 5x'd its size, because it was just a small testing vault while I was trying to figure things out. That made me upset, so I took to the forums to complain, and actually met a really energizing and really exciting community. So this was before Core Units. This was before there even was a GovAlpha, still when the Maker Foundation was around. But basically just started finding this really neat intellectual community where I could come there and say, hey, I think you guys are wrong because X, Y, and Z. And they would say, well, you probably didn't consider this. And it was actually really respectful and engaging, just really intellectually stimulating. So one thing led to another. I'm posting on the forum every day, starting to join calls, and before you know it, I became a governance facilitator. So it was really quite the journey for me of complete accident and happenstance.
Yeah, shout out to Coinbase Earn. I think that MakerDAO got 100x return on that because we were able to land Payton Row. So Patrick J, what about you? What inspired you to join GovAlpha Core Unit? And are you besties with Long for Wisdom?
I know just as much about Long for Wisdom as any of you guys do, which is very little. So I'm afraid you're not going to get any nuggets out of me. But I found out about Maker initially actually through the old ETH Trader subreddit. So before it split into ETH Finance, you had ETH Trader. And it was through the daily discussion there that people were talking about cool other projects on Ethereum. This was during the bear. So we'd had the 2017, 2018 run up, and then the big crash. So everyone was building in the bear, and Maker was a name that kept coming up. So I bought some tokens and held them for a good I think 18 months before I even found the forums. Similarly to Payton, came to the forum to complain about something and then never really left. And I remember I got into GovAlpha basically because Long put out a post asking for help. I think after the core unit was set up and they were looking to increase the number of contributors. Long made a post saying anyone interested in coming to do some work at GovAlpha, let me know. So DM'd along, and then that was it really. Took the full plunge into kind of full time with GovAlpha early 2022. So I left my old job at the end of March, and then have been full time at GovAlpha from kind of the start of May. And then in the summer was when, the guys had already spoken to me about did I want to become a facilitator, and then in the summer once we knew Long was stepping down, that's when I put my hat into the ring and was lucky enough that this great community put that trust in me, and hopefully I'm not letting them down.
I think we are lucky enough that you actually made this journey. So that's I think we have a pattern here. Both facilitators came to Maker because Maker did some silly thing. Maybe we should do some more silly things to attract more talent. So I don't know. I mean, there are various ways to make wrong things, right?
I have a feeling we're pretty good at finding them too.
They must be wrong in an interesting manner, right? Because otherwise nobody comes to complain. People just go like.
Well, I think it was more that our reasoning for why we thought it was wrong was actually shown to be incorrect. Well, it certainly was in my case, which then made me stay around. Because hang on, these guys are really smart. They know what's happening. I'm going to learn a lot by hanging around here. And yeah, I think that's how we both ended up at Maker. I think it's really, I do agree. I think it's super interesting that we both were just moaning and then have ended up, in such a central part of the DAO, which is really cool.
I actually wonder if there are any things that happened in the last months that could be considered as controversial enough to bring people into the forum to complain. I mean, of course, the whole getting centralized stablecoin as collateral is something, but that wasn't an event, right? That slowly ramped up over the last 2 years, and people. I mean, there are a lot of people complaining about that, but it's not that there was a singularity event that made us change our mind, right? It's people kind of accepted it, I would say, silently.
Yeah, recently we've seen a lot of stuff on crypto Twitter about kind of the Gemini situation in GUSD. Wouldn't be too surprising if some new community members found their way via that. I don't know. It's kind of interesting too, because with Maker, it's like every little change, there's so many diverse interests that basically could make you care about what we're doing with DAI or with the protocol at large. That really every change to someone is kind of important, and I think that's really what lit the fire under me for on the governance end, right? Was this idea that like, hey, this everyone cares about this to a certain extent, and governance is the ability for someone who cares a lot to say, hey, I think something's wrong and we should do something about it, and actually usher that through. Like that's what's super exciting, and that's the spark that I'm hoping we can keep alive whatever iteration of Maker exists. Is this idea that like, hey, if you have a well-reasoned argument, if you are supported by the facts, you can actually present them and use them to make an improvement that affects everybody, right? Affects essentially this public good. So yeah, that's what keeps me coming back day in and day out, and that's what I think we're trying to keep.
I'm actually surprised, to be honest, after the GUSD debt ceiling to 0 poll failed, that there was no turmoil on the forum. It was just silently accepted. I mean, the same way as it appeared in the voting portal, which was kind of surprising. It was, for me, also kind of surprising that by the time it failed, nothing really happened, right? I mean, we are going to increase the tout now, I guess. No, lower the tout to 0. But yeah, the DC was the controversial thing, I would say.
Yeah, but I think just what you pointed out first, I think, and then I think slowly but surely other people came to the same conclusion, is that lowering the DC actually doesn't do anything, right? Like we can still liquidate that position if we want to without lowering the DC, and it's highly unlikely that they come and refill.
I mean, by the time we decide that we're gonna liquidate the position, we simultaneously will decrease the DC to 0. This doesn't make sense to liquidate and leave the DC where it is right now. But yeah, this can be done in the single transaction. This doesn't need to be done a week before, 2 weeks before, a month before, whenever this.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things we don't know at the moment is how much outflow there's going to be naturally when the tout goes to 0. So that's happening in the next executive. And it'll be really interesting to see, like, where will 100 million flow out anyway, just because people are going to arbitrage to USD, which is what used to happen. So before the debt ceiling got increased and the tout got increased, anytime GUSD went into the PSM, it automatically got arbitraged straight back out again. So you were getting, 100,000 put in and then 90,000 would go out like within a few blocks. So it's actually going to be really interesting to observe that and see, like, what's kind of the natural state that the system will balance at with respect to the GUSD PSM.
Do you really think that something is going to happen as soon as the tout is to 0?
I don't know.
Yeah. Okay.
It might do. I mean, if there's profit to be made, people will do it.
Well, here's a full disclosure, real quick. The night before the vote ended, I did run into someone from Wintermute, and conversation started. Besides Happy New Year's and all good wishes, obviously, once we got away from that, the next thing was about the current vote. So I got the impression that Wintermute was 5 steps ahead of the game, and they were salivating for this thing to go to a debt ceiling of 0 so it can be liquidated. So I have no idea. I didn't want to push the envelope and ask exactly what they were thinking, but I do get the idea that if you're a market maker, you're going to try to find opportunities where you can make money.
They can market make or arbitrage even with a tout of 0 without the DC being lowered, right? Or is there is no reason to hold back? They can start right away after the next executive is scheduled, or actually not scheduled, but executed.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a permissionless module, so anyone can interact with it. You need the seed capital, so you'd either need USDC and go through the PSM to DAI to get it out, or you would need DAI to start with. But yeah, ultimately, I'm sure they have capital on hand, and if they're if there's money to be made, then I'm sure they'll find a way.
The problem with having a DC, right? The reason that was proposed as one of the options is because without it, it's entirely peg based, so we could empty it out, and if GUSD falls below peg, it's just going to fill up to the capacity that either the market or we allow it to. So yeah, I think that was kind of the reason for why a DC lowering was proposed in tandem. we might see some stuff happen. Like I said, it is all just PEG based. If GUSD is still trading above PEG, it'll flow out a little bit. But yeah, without other mechanisms, it will just be kind of at will of the market. I'll be curious to see basically how soon the next follow up is, because I assume simply setting it to 0, like if you're worried about the risks, that's not going to be enough for you. And if you're not worried about the risks, like having the tout at 0 isn't great, because then we're losing funds essentially. We're not getting paid on the exit what we could have been getting paid for the yield from Gemini. So I definitely think we've got kind of like an interesting risk management question here that clearly some large token holders are on the opposite end of, which gets pretty exciting. But yeah, we definitely didn't see, returning to initial question, a lot of public call out or fighting over it. But clearly the stage is set for some more contentious votes on GUSD, or maybe the need for more consensus setting next time before we end up firing off a vote on it.
But I mean, even if somebody like Wintermute would totally drain the GUSD PSM, we have an instant access module in front of it. So it's not possible to, even if GUSD depegs, to, I don't know, deposit $500 million of GUSD into the PSM directly. I think it's right now set to, I don't know, 15 million a day or something like this. So the blast radius of a depegging post-flush of the PSM is actually not that big.
Yeah, a lot to unpack there with Gemini's GUSD, the stablecoin. But let's move on. There might be some folks who watch this episode of Drinks with MakerDAO Delegates, and they might want to kind of understand a little bit more what exactly the role is of GovAlpha Core Unit. So Patrick J, can you kind of give us the Eli 5 and what exactly is the role of the GovAlpha Core Unit team in the MakerDAO ecosystem?
Oh yeah, I mean you've given me the hard question, because we wear so many different hats that it's really hard to kind of summarize, but I'll give it a stab. So GovAlpha at its core is responsible for the kind of managing and overseeing of the governance processes at MakerDAO. So that extends itself into quite a lot of different areas. So the really obvious, like people-facing side of it, if you will, is kind of like the posting of polls on the forums, on the voting portal. So we're responsible for that, and only GovAlpha facilitators are whitelisted to interact with the voting portal in that way. And then the other kind of very community-facing side of it would be like the executive votes as well. So we're responsible for kind of the overall executive vote process. So that involves ensuring that inclusions have gone through appropriate governance measures, ensuring that they're correctly, everything's correct. So we've got all the right parameters, they're correct, making sure that relevant mandated actors and core units are confirming that everything's correct. And then communicating that with protocol engineering and then making sure that the code we get delivered back to us is what we're expecting to see. And then we then again are whitelisted to post that onto the voting portal and say, hey guys, here's a new executive vote. But there's a lot of other things that surround that go into this management of governance process. So things like forum moderation, Discord moderation, subreddit moderation. We host calls, we manage the delegate program, as you guys well know. We're kind of responsible for making sure that you guys get paid properly, making sure that you're all voting and turning up to things. And communicating your votes. We are responsible for the kind of the mandated actors call, which happens weekly. So we run that, and where all the different core unit facilitators come, and we discuss goings on at Maker. Oh gosh, many other things as well. The MIPS portal, so making sure that MIPS that are coming through the governance pipeline, that they're appropriately written, that they follow the standards that Maker voters expect, that they have voted in. If they don't, we're responsible for stopping them and saying, hey, you need to go back and change these things, make sure that they're up to scratch. And then generally just, helping authors navigate governance, because Maker governance is really complex. Like, it's not easy, especially if you're an outsider to Maker. You guys have been around the block now. You guys know how Maker works to a degree. But if you're someone coming from Yearn, or you're someone coming from an outside party who really wants to get a proposal into Maker, they'll come to us and say, hey, GovAlpha, how was the best way to get I want this to happen. What's the best way for me to achieve that? And that's a really important part of GovAlpha's role that I think a lot of people don't recognize. Is we're having calls with real world assets companies. We're having calls with Yearn. We're having Discord threads, Telegram threads. And how do we get these proposals into the best shape possible, and how to make them acceptable to Maker governance. We also do a lot of stuff that's kind of just filling in the gaps. So Maker holders want something to happen or have voted something through, and there isn't really anyone that's kind of mandated to do it. We will try our best to either fill in as best we can, or kind of find someone else, or bother someone else enough to make them do it. But I don't know, Payton, is there anything that I haven't covered there that you want to add?
No, I mean, there's a lot of like fun bits and pieces. What it really comes down to is, right, we're facilitating the governance. We're trying to make sure that as a decentralized organization, like people are able to have meaningful votes and change the protocol should there be token holder desire to do so. And then that's why we end up with all this random stuff, because you realize like, oh, well, obviously someone's going to need to be doing communications for votes. Someone's going to need to be like, you start stacking up all these dominoes, and we can get different core units to help, right? But at the end of the day, like if something isn't done and it affects a vote, like that's kind of on our shoulders. So we kind of have to have our hands in a lot of different pots just to monitor and make sure things are going more or less as they should be, because if not, it could really lead to a big governance mishap, especially as a decentralized org, right? Like our methods of control, to use one word, or solidarity, if you're looking for a more positive one, are very little, right? Like we don't come to the same office. We don't, have all these like legal norms that we all subscribe to, where people from around the globe, some talks, some not, coming together to make this decentralized organization. So respect and belief in the governance process is super important. Basically, like people have to really say, okay, well, the Maker holders voted, like it was a fair vote, it occurred, and they wanted this way. So even if I'm on the wrong side of that, maybe later I'll try again. But if there's not that respect for the process, the community kind of disintegrates. So we're at that core of keeping things together, and that leads to all sorts of fun interactions.
Just one quick follow up. I was actually not aware that communities from the outside see GovAlpha as the go-to unit when it comes to, I don't know, future collaborations and stuff. I would always have thought that this is just coming over the growth core unit. So you mentioned Yearn, which was I think up for vote last week, or I don't know, in this cycle. So how long did it actually took from the first contact to this proposal that was voted on?
Yeah, so I mean, when you mention growth, normally growth might be the first contact, but then they'll say, if you want to ask about how governance works, go and speak to Patrick or Payton, they're GovAlpha, and they're so kind of we'll get past people from other core units. So I think in the case of Yearn, I think it was actually the Risk core unit they'd reached out to, because they saw that Risk had kind of in their mandate was kind of collateral onboarding from like decentralized protocols. So they'd gone to Risk, and then Risk had sent them to us to like say, hey, these guys have this idea. Can you help them through the process? So I think it was November actually, because they had their post on the forum for a long time, because we don't have the cycle in December. It only got voted on in January. But yeah, Yearn had seen these other proposals saying, Coinbase, GUSD, OUSD, there was CoinShares, all these different companies that were wanting a piece of the PSM. And they were like, well, hang on, we can do that on chain. We think that's a compelling thing for Maker holders that sets us as apart from these other companies, and we want to offer them that. So when and actually I thought the Yearn guys, because they are a DAO, they kind of were quite good at knowing how governance was going to work, more so compared to maybe more traditional companies are. So they were quite good at navigating the MIPS process. I have to say, I didn't have to give them very much help, but they'll send drafts of proposals saying, hey, does this look okay? Or if I wanted to be able to change this later down the line, how would I do, those kind of questions about how Maker governance would work and interact with their MIP. So that's kind of how I was helping them, kind of just explaining how Maker works and making sure that anything they wanted to do, they were able to do.
Yeah, there was one particular thing about the Yearn proposal that in retrospective I find interesting. I mean, it was in the forum for quite some time, but I think it took until the actual voting when people started to start negotiating about, hey, maybe you should do some fair share of the fees and whatnot. I wonder if this could be better organized. It probably could be better organized. I just don't know why or how, actually. But I mean, those discussions should be done before it goes into freeze, right? And most of the stuff actually happened after freeze, which is kind of similar to a lot of things that we see in on-chain things, I'd say.
Yeah, I mean, this is something we spend a lot of time talking about internally, is how do we get people to engage with our FC? You know, how you know, because I mean, I don't want to kind of second guess how you guys actually work, but it feels like, you know, sometimes people aren't reading proposals until they're actually on the voting portal ready for them to vote. Now, I'm not sure if that's fair to you guys as delegates, but, you know, like you say, you know, people were discussing the fees. Oh, this is on the voting portal. I'd better discuss this now. Whereas actually, you're right. How do we move that process to happening earlier so that these things can be written into the MIPS? And it's a really difficult problem to solve. And maybe that's something that Endgame will help with. So maybe you'll have more focused sub-DAOs that are, you know, rather than having 12, 13, 14 MIPS that they're trying to review and comment on and give feedback on, they'll have 1 or 2 proposals. So you can really focus on things in much more detail. And that's a potential strength of how the system might work. But yeah, like, to answer your question, I don't know how to get people to do that. We don't know. It's something we've been struggling with.
I mean, I think that's interesting. Like, I've been reading up a little bit on ARDBEG and ARDBEG governance, and if you look at the early governance when it was still small, you had like a proposal, and then there's 1 or 2 replies of like people who are now core to how ARDBEG is run. But at that time, I think either were team members or just remote contributors, and you know, there's 1 or 2 replies, and then the thing goes to vote, and that's it. So I'm really curious how this will evolve in Endgame, and this brings me to my next question, which is, so Endgame was produced I think the first time I heard about it was last May, and then the DVC call started, and GovAlpha, I think, has a very interesting role to play in that, because as long as it wasn't officially voted in, like, you couldn't really participate in that proposal, right? Can you give me a little bit of an overview of like what's your role there and how you approached it as it evolved, and how you came around to working on it, or at what point you decided, okay, now is the time we can really deploy resources towards that?
Yeah, this is like a big challenge for us as a core unit. So I'm happy to have Patrick share like his viewpoint. I'm sure it's slightly different than mine. Obviously, in-game presents like a particular challenge, right? Because we as GovAlpha have a neutrality mandate. We're really just here to make sure that governance can happen, right? We want to get the stuff out there, make sure that the community can participate, share opinions, have discussions, reach consensus, all that good stuff. So typically how something will happen with a proposal, right, is a proposal author will come along. Like you said, it's pretty normal for us to engage, maybe help with drafts, coach through the governance process, that sort of thing. That happens all the time on most proposals. But generally speaking, right, like if a proposal says, hey, we should change XYZ, we say, okay, well, let's see what governance thinks. If governance decides we're going to change XYZ, then GovAlpha will respond this way, and you know, we'll kind of deal with it when we cross the road there. With in-game, the changes are both so massive, right? Like we're talking like a completely reorganization of governance. This isn't necessarily something we could say, okay, well, here's more or less like what GovAlpha believes this MIP is about, and we'll deal with it when it gets there. So you have that challenge, and then you also have this kind of like voting weight challenge as well, right? Like Rune, as the founder of MKR, carries a ton of MKR weight. So when he's coming forward and saying, "Hey, I'm planning to submit this thing to change it, and I'm going to be voting with my full weight behind it," that also kind of increases the like, oh, well, this could actually happen, you know. Obviously, we as GovAlpha, we don't try to predict how votes are going to go down, but when large holders say, you know, they're going to do something, it's our policy to listen, right? You know, same thing when a VC asks us questions, or they say, hey, we have a problem with this, we're going to be voting here, we expect that vote to happen. So very quickly we kind of knew that, like, hey, Rune's pretty serious about this, he's going to be pushing this, and you know, one way or another we're going to have to confront it. So we just started same way we would anything, with reading, approaching, attending public calls, that sort of thing. But as it kind of continued to get a minimum momentum and grow larger, we said, all right, well, Longer Wisdom had recently stepped down as facilitator. He was still looking to contribute to GovAlpha, but wasn't exactly sure what he should do. We said, that's like a really great task for you. Is, hey, let's focus on some documentation for Rune's plan, because you're really good at distilling stuff down. You're no longer a facilitator, so it's like less icky from a neutrality standpoint if you're spending more of your time doing this. And yeah, it's a good way to retain you as well. Kind of felt like once the vote passed for that like pre-launch MIP set, where Rune changed a bunch of MIPs and passed a few more. That was kind of the moment where I felt much more comfortable for Patrick and I just kind of like publicly taking on time and taking on roles. But us as a core unit had to kind of respond to it before that could take place, which isn't always the case. So yeah, I don't know if there's anything you want to clarify or add your perspective on, Patrick, but that's my brief synopsis on how we approach just the complexity of like, hey, here's a founder proposing something that's huge, and yeah, you guys have a mandate both to process it but also to treat it neutrally. So how do you deal with that?
Yeah, no, I think that's quite a fair summary, and I think it's important that our mandate is to carry out the will of MKR voters. And MKR voters have approved this plan, so we believe that by getting involved in the process, by advising on different aspects of it and helping even write some of it, that's us fulfilling our mandate in that MKR voters have approved this plan. So it's our job to make it happen as best we can as GovAlpha, in the same way that it's our job to change the GUSD, get the GUSD tout changed, or to fulfill any other MIPs that get passed as well. Yeah, but as Payton said, there was a very clear delineation between what we were doing before that vote passed and then after that vote's passed.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense, and I think Endgame presents a lot of like really formidable governance challenges. And are you like looking forward to kind of contributing to that? I think like your knowledge is dearly needed there. So, like in your mind, is this something that you've just started to think more about and like started to shape?
So for GovAlpha, I think we play a really critical role during the transition of just seeing how this plays out, right? Because another challenge of Endgame is Rune does have a lot of elements that he keeps changing, right? To him, this is a plan that for how large and encompassing it is pretty set, right? Like he's changing X, Y, and Z, but like for how massive the plan is, I'm sure they don't feel like large changes to him. But to the community who hasn't been working on this for years, it can be challenging to keep up with. So in the interim, I see us playing like a really important role of just like trying to get out like what is going on with Endgame, like what has been approved by governance, and just trying to make it clear what the rules are, so to speak. So can drop a little bit of alpha perhaps by the time this is posted. It'll no longer be alpha, but we're going to be launching the in-game documentation site next week. It's our plan from GoAlpha. So we've been working just to try to document as much as we can and banging our heads against the wall as it changes and coming up with a procedure for like, all right, how can we actually adapt and make sure that we can get it as up to date as possible. So yeah, that's just a chief example where I see us kind of fitting in for the in-game transition, because yeah, I mean, there's a lot of cool governance design things to do as well. Happy to talk about those. Those are like maybe more fun, but as a core unit, the function we have to really make sure is getting done is that there's this communication, this transparency with the DAO and MKR holders.
So like I think this was like a good teaser. So like what excites you the most? Like what kind of governance challenges do you think are the most exciting, just to you personally or to Patrick?
Yeah, I can. So like one of the things I've been really focusing on for the past kind of month really is like how arbitration is going to work in the end game. So this is there's going to be an arbitration scope, and part of that responsibility is going to be when when Rune's designed the end game, he's building into it penalties and incentives. So incentives for if you behave well, and if you make lots of money, then you make lots of money yourself. You know, it's this kind of feedback loop. And if you do things that are against the constitution or that are against the rules set down in the scopes, you have penalties. And how you apply those penalties and how you identify people that are bad actors in the system is all going to fall under arbitration. And you know, so you'll have someone saying, you know, an example that I commonly use would be an ecosystem actor has done work for a sub DAO and the sub DAO hasn't paid, you know, their recourse would be to go through an arbitration system. And so thinking about how you design that system to work in a decentralized manner and in a way that is fair for everyone. It doesn't just favor people who've got money, but also can build in financial penalties and incentives, and in a way that avoids spam, has been a really difficult governance task. And when things are then changing in the background, so governor DAOs becoming facilitator DAOs and maybe having more of them than we were going to have initially, these things all then feed back into how you could design this system. So that's maybe some alpha there of something I've been working on. It's certainly not ready to have a kind of to be shared yet, but I'm hoping that we'll get something down soon enough that we can share. But yeah, then kind of other things we're contributing to is kind of scope design. So like I think we're fine to say we had our first kind of governance security scope meeting recently, which was kind of a dry run for how scopes are going to work in general. So how the scopes will be written and how they'll be updated. And we think, you know, as GovAlpha, we're quite well positioned to discuss governance security. It's a lot of what our role is governance security. You know, you guys will know we'll spend time messaging delegates to make sure they're supporting the hat, or you know, executives are supported properly. We think we've got a lot to offer in kind of designing how those kind of systems should work in the end game, and kind of sharing our expertise and knowledge. So that's another area where we're looking to contribute as well.
There is one thing that I usually ask every time somebody from a core unit is there. When the whole endgame thing came up, and it was more than just a document, and really people realized, okay, this is probably going to happen. The first votes are going to come up, and there is a huge potential this goes through. A lot of people from core units that were not directly assigned to be Maker Core. So if you are in product, if you're part of protocol engineering, it's probably pretty easy, job safety, all good. There is not an issue, but for everybody else, I was seeing lots of confusion and fear. And I can imagine that similar things happened to the GovAlpha team in the very beginning as well. Maybe you might want to share a bit, or how this journey was from you from an emotional perspective.
Yeah, it's been a roller coaster for sure, because like on the one hand we were like, well, they're gonna need to do some governance, you know, like you know, we can probably feel like somewhat safe, but on the other hand, this is this idea of like, well, if the current system is broken and we've been the ministers of that system, like, you know, maybe it's our fault, maybe it's Rune's view that it's our fault. If either of those are the case, that's probably not great for us and our job security. So it was definitely a shock. And I don't know, because like Rune had come out with the Sagittarius engine post, you know, view for clean money. Like we had been seeing a lot of design things from Rune, but they all seemed kind of far off and maybe not like fully formed. And I think, you know, when in-game came, I think that was kind of my first reaction, was just like, oh, it's another Rune pipe dream. But then it became quite clear that he's serious. Like he thinks like, A, we need to do this, and B, like this might actually work. So yeah, I don't know. It's a roller coaster for sure. I think I was particularly worried at the early days, just because this notion that like Rune was doing this to fight corruption, right? So does that mean like all the core units are corrupt? Like, is he doing this because he thinks like I'm not carrying out my job duties correctly? You know, like these are kind of the thoughts that were going through my head, and I think I struggled with that discourse, a lot of it too, because we always say, well, you know, in a system where this can happen, like people are always going to take advantage of it, and they're always going to do this and this. And I think that was particularly emotionally hard on me, because I felt like, you know, I had really tried to be Team MakerDAO and really act with the DAO's best interest at heart. So it's like a little difficult hearing someone say like, oh, well, you know, there's the system, it's just corrupted, it's you know, it's going to take advantage of MKR holders and yada yada. But I think it's kind of that like learning acquisition graph, right? You know, it's not like it's straight up as you get to know more in game. You're just like, oh yeah, this is great. It gets better every day. There's some days it gets really better, and there's some days where you just feel totally lost. It is just kind of a sine wave with an upward slope. So that's been my experience of just getting really excited, really jazzed up about something, feeling kind of like lost and desolate because I don't think I'm going to fit into it, and then being like, oh wow, this could really have an opportunity for me. So I've whiplashed probably more than Patrick. Patrick's just I think taking a much more pragmatic stance than me, which is just like, hey, let's just evaluate, contribute, and try to showcase our value, which is a much more rational approach. I tend to get a little more caught up in the momentum of things, I think. And game momentum has shifted several times. I don't know, Patrick, if you have more emotional reactions or not, but maybe enough emotions for the both of us.
Yeah, no, I think you covered it pretty well. I don't really have much to add to that.
I really like what you said there at the end, evaluate value and showcase your talent. Specifically, when you're in a DAO, decentralized organization, which is such a difficult nucleus to explain to, you know, the everyday Jane and Joe exactly what you're doing when you are contributing to a DAO. I guess if you could forward the clock to the future, maybe 5 to 10 years out, and we see a plethora of DAOs popping up in the DeFi ecosystem, or even you know, in the NFT world, you get a bunch of DAOs popping up. What are some of the recommendations that you could give a young DAO on how governance should be executed when it comes to, governing decentralized DAOs?
So I think one of the things that Maker has got right is you have a very predictable governance cadence. So you know that as delegates, as voters, you know that every Monday there's going to be new, or most Mondays, maybe not every Monday, there'll be polls going up, but you know that they're going to be up on Monday, run till Thursday, or if they're MIPS, they're going to go up on Monday and run for 2 weeks, which I think is a real benefit. You see in some DAOs where anyone can push a proposal at any time, and you know, they might not last for maybe as long as the Maker proposal either. There might be 24, 48-hour long votes. People don't even know these votes are happening until they're done. So I think a strength of Maker is that it's got this predictability, and people might look at it and think, actually, you know, Maker's really slow. You know, why have I got to wait a month for my proposal? But it's designed in a way that voters can have the maximum amount of time to get the information they need to make a coherent vote. And maybe it depends on what your DAO is intending to achieve. So, you know, Maker's managing a multi-billion-dollar stablecoin. So, you know, if we mess up, we can wreck a lot of people. Maybe if your DAO's focusing on something that's not quite as not important's the wrong word, but not quite as risky, or not quite as is embedded into the ecosystem as Maker is, then maybe you can afford to have a bit more of a haphazard system. But I certainly think having an element of predictability in how things work is something I would recommend anyone if they were asking me.
And I guess my main advice is just to realize that like your first idea isn't going to be the best. I think like it's really easy to get like wrapped up in this spark of an idea, right? It's like, hey, we should do this, it'll fix all of our problems, and you just really want to hold on to it. And I think engaging in DAOs is really like kind of understanding that like your idea may not be best, right? Like the collective is able to have better decision making than you individually. So the biggest thing I would say to new DAOs is just start thinking about like how you can start cultivating that collective, because if you don't have a community, if you don't have an identity, something you stand for, it's going to be really hard to make governance decisions, because when people are inevitably voted against, the thought will cross their mind, what am I doing here? Like, maybe, do I really want to be a part of this community? And you want that like strong cohesion of supporting different values and opinions and perspectives to really keep people coming back every day. That's really what it's about. It's like, how do you maintain this just diverse, really smart pool of people that are passionate about the thing we all come together to work on.